Tsavo Reserve, early morning. Before the wind had stirred and while the horizon still carried the heavy shadow of night, a hush fell across the land that seemed deeper than silence itself. The world hadn't quite woken, not fully. Light spilled lazily across the plains, brushing over thorned acacia, rust-colored soil, and long-dried riverbeds that coiled like old veins across the reserve's southern basin. It was here, amid cracked mud and sparse tufts of brittle grass, that a ranger's gaze settled on a still shape lying beside a shallow, retreating waterhole. At first, from a distance, the body seemed like a dark ridge in the earth, too still, too quiet, too much a part of the landscape. But as the ranger approached slowly, the shape revealed itself for what it was. A massive elephant cow collapsed on her side, her form partially embedded in hardened clay. One ear folded beneath her skull, the other limp against her cheek, fluttering only slightly when a gust of wind disturbed the heat-thickened air. Her legs were drawn in, tucked beneath her body in an awkward crescent that suggested not sleep, but surrender. Her skin, coated with a patchwork of dried mud and dust, bore faint glimmers under the muted morning light, like cracked parchment pulled tight over muscle that no longer moved. Her trunk, curled beneath her tusk, lay still. From a closer vantage, the ranger could see her flanks lift and fall, barely. The movement was slow, shallow, labored, not the rhythmic breath of rest, but the heavy exhale of something fighting to continue. Around her, the soil was undisturbed. There were no prints, no broken branches, no churned earth. She hadn't shifted in hours. This, more than her stillness, sent alarm bells quietly ringing in the ranger's chest. Elephants don't lie down for long. Their immense bodies press against internal organs when flat for too long, and yet she lay there, unmoving, as the sun inched higher. Her breathing grew more visible in the increasing light, not from strength, but strain. Close inspection revealed the tension across her lower body, her abdomen rounded, stretched, and drawn tight beneath the weight of late-stage pregnancy. A bulge along her underside pulsed with faint movements not her own. The ranger's eyes softened with recognition. She was trying to give birth, but something was wrong. Her position, half lodged in cooling clay, left her unable to rise. Mud that had once offered relief from heat had hardened overnight into a shallow cast around her legs. The tension in her limbs wasn't resistance, it was entrapment. And if she was stuck, and labor had started, time was narrowing in on both mother and calf. A quiet urgency began to pulse through the moment. No panic, no raised voices, just a silent understanding exchanged between men trained to move without disrupting what could not be hurried. A message was sent out across the radio. Pregnant female, non-mobile, possible labor, South Basin. Help was requested. The reply came quick, short, and measured. They waited, but they did not stand idle. One of the rangers knelt down slowly, pouring water from a flask into a metal dish and easing it into reach of her curled trunk. She didn't respond, not even a twitch of muscle or extension of her tip toward moisture. Yet the ranger left it there, respectfully. These gestures weren't about forcing aid, but offering presence. Nearby, another ranger shifted a few sharp rocks from around her lower leg, gently clearing a space in case movement came later. No one spoke above a whisper. No sudden actions followed. They had entered her space, but with the reverence of those who understood that this was her moment, not theirs. The mother didn't cry out. But now, her breath has changed. A tremor passed visibly through her spine. Subtle but unmistakable, a shudder not from cold but from effort. Her flank contracted again, tighter this time, and her ear twitched once. There was no call to her herd, no family shadow nearby. Whether she had fallen behind, wandered away in instinctive solitude, or been separated, they couldn't know. What was clear was this: she was alone. And now she was in labor. By the time the veterinary team arrived, less than an hour later, the heat had begun to swell across the plain, pressing down in waves. A thin layer of sweat coated the brows of the rangers, but they didn't wipe it. The vet, a middle-aged man with weathered eyes and a calm, focused gait, approached slowly. He crouched down a few meters from the elephant, eyes scanning her frame with practiced experience. No need for tools yet. He read the signs with nothing more than breath, skin, stillness, and the way her belly contracted in slow, rhythmic intervals. Her body was working, but it was struggling. If she could not rise, delivery could turn dangerous fast. A baby elephant emerging while its mother lay flat risked being trapped beneath her, suffocated by the very body that bore it. Worse still, the exertion could cause her own body to shut down, internal tearing, hemorrhage, organ compression. These were not rare outcomes in wild births gone wrong. The vet didn't voice these possibilities, but he knew them. They all did. And so began the wait, not a passive one, but an attentive, silent vigil. Every minute stretched longer. The sun crept higher, and the contractions became more frequent, more defined. With each wave, the mother shifted just slightly. Her foot twitched, her eyes opened, glazed but conscious. A deep sound vibrated from her throat, barely a cry, more a release of tension, then faded into the heat. Time passed. Then came the first visible sign, the slightest glimpse of a membrane, glistening with moisture, pushing through beneath her tail. A collective stillness rippled across the humans present. The birth had begun. The vet leaned in, squinting. Positioning was not ideal. The calf was coming, but if her body remained trapped, it would emerge into a space too narrow, too constrained. Still, intervention at this stage carried its own risks. Approaching, touching, attempting to pull or assist could send her into distress, and with elephants, panic often proved fatal. So they waited, ready, watching, poised. Minutes passed. More of the calf became visible, a foot, then a second, both slick and trembling. It was happening, but slowly, painfully slowly. Then she tried to move. It was barely perceptible. Her leg twitched, elbow pressing against clay, and her chest lifted a few inches. But even that effort caused her to grunt audibly, a deep, pained rumble. The vet stepped back, giving her space. She pushed again, her spine arching harder, her muscles trembling. And with a final exhale, sharp and sudden, the calf slid halfway free. A moment passed, terrifying in its stillness. Then the mother moaned again, and the final push came. The newborn elephant tumbled into the shallow trench, its body slick with birth fluids, its legs folded beneath it, eyes sealed tight. But the calf didn't move. The rangers exchanged glances. The vet stepped closer now, slowly, crouching near the calf without crossing into the mother's space. He waited for breath, a twitch, anything. Then a gasp, shallow, gurgled, and a shiver along the newborn's back. The calf was alive. It was breathing, but weakly. Its trunk flopped limply. The mother didn't rise. She couldn't, not yet. The vet turned to the team. "We need to clear the airways," he said softly. One of the rangers approached with gauze and a suction bulb, kneeling beside the calf and gently clearing the nostrils, brushing fluid away from its mouth. The calf's breath deepened. Then a soft sound, barely a chirp, almost a cough. It was enough. But now came the next danger. The calf, exposed, wet, and defenseless, was resting against the mother's abdomen, and her chest had begun to rise more rapidly. Movement could crush it. The vet whispered, "We need space, just a little." They didn't want to pull the calf away, but they needed to nudge it clear of her ribs. With 2 hands, one ranger gently cupped the calf's side and shifted it no more than a foot backward. The mother's ear flapped once in acknowledgement, but she made no move to resist. Her eye opened. For the first time, it met the calf. She didn't trumpet, didn't reach with her trunk, but her chest heaved and a low hum vibrated in her throat, deep, low, resonant, a greeting, a call only elephants understood. The calf twitched in response. The birth was over. But now comes the harder part. She had to stand. Without rising, she couldn't nurse, and without milk, the calf wouldn't survive. And she was still trapped. They couldn't dig too aggressively. Noise and sudden motion would frighten both. But the vet gave a nod, and 2 rangers began to scrape the hardened mud from around her front leg, carefully, silently. The minutes stretched again. A breeze kicked up at last, cooling the sweat on every back, lifting dust into the morning air. Overhead, vultures circled, distant, curious, uninvited. Then she moved again. This time, it was deliberate. Her leg pressed harder. Her chest lifted higher, and with a sudden awkward lurch, she rolled just slightly, enough to free her limb from the trench. A pause, then another heave. Her rear leg followed, and slowly, inch by inch, she rose, first to her knees, then wobbling onto her feet, trunk dangling low, eyes unfocused, ears still slack. But she was up. Unsteady, trembling, but up. The calf, sensing her nearness, tried to lift its head. It failed, then tried again. Succeeding just enough to lift its snout toward the massive shadow now hovering over it, the mother stepped forward, reached out with her trunk, and nudged the calf gently along the spine. It shuddered, then squeaked. A high, piercing sound. Another nudge. The calf tried to rise, failed, then again, and finally, awkwardly, stood on 4 shaking legs, leaning against its mother for balance. The rangers stepped back farther. Their work was done. The vet gave a soft sigh, removing his gloves. The mother turned slightly, positioning herself so the calf could reach her side. The tiny mouth searched blindly, bumping against her leg, then belly, and finally found what it needed, latching on, feeding, breathing, alive. In the distance, a low trumpeting echoed faintly. Another elephant, maybe more. Whether they'd return or not, the rangers didn't know. But for now, the wind was moving again. Grass swayed gently across the plain, and beside the shrinking waterhole, under the rising heat of day, 2 lives stood quietly against the silence, beginning again. Kamau had been on enough patrols to know the difference between silence and stillness. Silence could hum with life, carry warning or invitation. Stillness, true stillness, spoke of something else entirely. That morning, as his boots crunched across the brittle soil near the southern basin of Tsavo, the air around him seemed to hold its breath. Light was higher now, no longer golden but pale and bright, washing over the sun-bleached expanse with an unfeeling calm. And in the middle of it, half sunken into the hardening clay near a receding waterhole, she lay exactly as reported. Her body curved into the earth like an old stone left behind by time, unmoved, unshifting, silent. Kamau didn't need the confirmation. He recognized her the moment he saw her, not because of her size or her age, but the scar. It hooked across her right flank like a question mark etched by survival. Years ago, she had limped past their night camp with 2 calves in tow, guiding them without haste, without sound. She was one of the quieter matriarchs, rarely seen near the roads, favoring distant riverbeds, always moving just beyond the horizon. Seeing her now, collapsed, ribcage straining upward, breath thin and broken, hit something old in Kamau's chest. He slowed his steps. There was no need to rush. The situation was urgent. But she did not need urgency. She needed presence. He crouched a few meters from her head, not speaking, not signaling, just letting her see him. His scent would reach her before his voice ever did. Elephants don't need language to read intention. Her left ear fluttered once, barely lifting from the dust. That was enough. Kamau's voice came low, no louder than a murmur. "It's okay, girl." He wasn't asking her to move. He wasn't commanding anything. It was a presence, not a plea, a witness to her pain. Behind him, the medical truck slowed to a stop, and 2 rangers stepped out with quiet footsteps. The vet was with them. Ngala, a man who had spent more time with collapsed elephants than Kamau cared to remember. They didn't speak loudly. No one ever did in moments like this. The radio was used only once, transmitting a single coded update to the central station. 1 known matriarch, active labor, non-mobile, hydration unknown, time-sensitive. Then, the world returned to hushed movement. They moved in slow arcs around her, keeping space between their bodies and hers, careful not to cast shadows over her face or flank. The vet knelt near her back leg, examining the protrusion already visible, part of the amniotic sac, a glistening half-fold of membrane that shimmered against the matte gray of her skin. A foot, partially extended, pressed faintly from within. The calf was alive, trying, but not yet in the world. The danger was immediate and multifold. If she remained down, the calf could be borne onto its side, with no room for breath, no clear airway, no chance to stand. Worse, if her body bore down with the wrong pressure, exhausted and half sunk into clay, the calf could be trapped under her own mass. Either outcome risked death. There was also the mother's safety. A prolonged lateral position could impair circulation, compressing internal organs, lowering heart output, and accelerating collapse. Even without birth complications, her survival would depend on movement, and she had not shifted since sunrise. Kamau instructed 2 rangers to begin perimeter clearing, not loudly, not forcefully, just enough to remove sharp debris from the soil around her shoulder and hip in case she attempted to rise. Another ranger poured clean water into a steel basin and approached with careful hands, placing it near her curled trunk, stepping back without waiting for a reaction. She didn't reach for it. Her eyes, when they opened, moved slowly, first toward Kamau, then toward nothing at all. She was present, but fading, holding on in a way Kamau had seen before, in those rare moments when instinct battled biology and time stood at the door. Ngala watched her rib cage and measured contraction timing aloud, more for the log than for the team. 7 minutes, unchanged. It wasn't good news. In elephants, active labor could span hours, but stalled intervals this early often meant obstruction, or exhaustion too deep for the muscles to push. Kamau knew she'd made the journey to this basin alone, likely in the dark when pain had started. The lack of tracks meant she hadn't moved far once arriving. The mud caked around her limbs suggested she'd lain down before the waterhole began to dry, which meant at least 1 full night exposed, alone, in labor. With predators not far from this stretch of reserve, she had either chosen isolation or fallen behind. Kamau didn't like the second option. A matriarch falling behind meant more than 1 life at risk. It meant a herd was already without its leader. And if this calf died, and she followed, Tsavo would lose an anchor bloodline it couldn't replace. The team decided on a low-intervention movement first. No sedation, no machines, just earth. 2 rangers approached with long-handled scrapers, easing their tools into the hardened mud near her rear leg, watching how the ground cracked and gave. They weren't digging. Not yet. Just breaking the seal where her limb met earth, creating margin for movement when her body was ready. Every gesture was small, deliberate. No one spoke unless needed. Kamau remained near her front, still crouched, tracking her eye and breath, watching for any flicker of response, anger, panic, confusion. None came. Her ears fluttered occasionally. Her trunk twitched once, but mostly she remained still. Not peaceful, just still. 20 minutes passed. The wind shifted slightly, brushing dust across the plain. Birds in the acacia trees above fell silent. A thin hum of insects rose in their place. Another contraction rolled visibly across her abdomen, lifting her ribcage with a slow, strained pulse. The calf's foot pushed further into daylight, slick and trembling. A soft sound escaped the mother's throat, not a trumpet, not a cry, but something lower, deeper, a note of effort. Kamau leaned slightly forward, one hand pressing into the soil to steady himself, ready but still. Another movement followed, not from the mother, but from the calf. The foot retracted, then pressed outward again, seeking space. Its body was trying, blindly, instinctively, but the angle was wrong. Without rotation, the shoulders wouldn't clear. The vet whispered low, "Posterior rotation needed. She has to stand." Kamau said nothing. He simply nodded once, his eyes still locked on the mother's face. The next 10 minutes blurred into a kind of breathless coordination. The team cleared more earth, slowly expanding the trench beside her hip. Not wide enough to dig, just soft enough to shift. One ranger retrieved saline packs from the vehicle and placed them near the vet in case IV fluid became necessary. Another stood watch, scanning the distance for any sign of movement. Lions, hyenas, even scavenger birds that could turn aggressive if the scene collapsed into death. Kamau kept his voice low and steady as he coordinated, but his posture never left her line of vision. Then it happened. A twitch in her hind leg, a slow press into the softened clay, then another. Her breathing quickened, not with panic, but with effort. Her ears flared slightly, pulling backward, and with a low grunt, she shifted her weight, first upward, then backward, then again. It was halting, uncertain, but it was real. Kamau rose halfway, instinctively ready to step back. Ngala motioned to the others. Everyone froze. She pushed, Her body arched, her legs tensed, and with a deep groan that trembled the air, she rolled slightly onto her chest. A front foot folded beneath her, then the other. Her shoulders lifted, her spine straightened, and then, with one final straining heave, she rose, wobbling, legs shaking, trunk swinging low. But she stood, fully, completely. For the first time in what could have been more than 20 hours, she had risen to her feet. The entire team held still. No one moved closer. The calf, still partially emerged, hung motionless for a breath. Then the mother turned, adjusting her hindquarters instinctively, repositioning her body so gravity could assist where strength had failed. One deep breath, another, and then, with a sudden fluid movement, the calf slipped free, tumbling into the dirt with a soft thud, its limbs curled and glistening, trunk limp. It did not cry. It did not move. Kamau's heart caught. Ngala stepped forward 2 paces, waiting. The calf twitched. A shiver passed down its spine, then a gasp. It breathed. Kamau exhaled. The calf was alive. But the work wasn't over. Now comes the question of bonding, feeding, standing. The next 3 hours would determine if the mother could produce colostrum, if the calf could latch, if standing reflexes were present. The mother, though swaying, lowered her trunk to nudge her newborn. A soft touch, then another. The calf chirped once, weak but audible. It blinked, it moved. Kamau stood back from the pair, watching, silent. He didn't need to approach. His part was done. The matriarch was no longer still. She was breathing, standing, protecting. And for now, that was enough. The shift, when it came, was neither loud nor sudden. It didn't announce itself with a cry or a dramatic change in posture. Instead, it arrived the way wind begins, barely felt at first, just a sensation brushing the edge of attention before revealing itself in patterns too consistent to ignore. Kamau noticed the first twitch not in her limbs but along her belly, where the tight curvature of her heavily pregnant frame shuddered beneath the stillness that had gripped her since dawn. A ripple passed through the lower quadrant of her abdomen, then another, delicate yet purposeful. There was nothing violent about it, no jerk or convulsion, only the slow unfurling of something deeper, the body preparing, the muscle remembering, the ancient process of birth beginning to stir under the weight of exhaustion. Her tail lifted briefly, a faint tremor running along its base, then settled again against her flank. Kamau leaned forward slightly, his boots grounded, elbows resting on his knees, and narrowed his eyes toward the space just beneath her hip. It was there, glinting faintly in the cracked earth, that he saw it. A thin, steady line of clear fluid tracing downward across the hardened clay. His breath caught, but his body didn't move. There was no need to speak. The signs were clear. The amniotic sac had ruptured. She was in labor, active labor, and yet she had not shifted her weight, not tried to roll, not made the first effort to rise. Gala appeared at his side moments later, crouching low near her rear, eyes sweeping across the space with clinical care. He didn't ask what Kamau had seen. He saw it for himself, the pooling evidence of what was to come. But beneath that fact was the larger truth both men now shared in silence. She was too weak. This labor, long delayed and now inevitable, had arrived before her body was ready to meet it. The risks doubled with every passing minute. Kamau watched the surface of her skin carefully. More tremors now, moving in waves down her side, faint muscle contractions trying to establish rhythm, each one punctuated by an equally visible lack of response. Her legs remained slack, folded beneath her, her massive torso pressed into the basin's shallow trench of hardened earth. She did not lift her trunk. She did not call. Her ears moved faintly, catching some sound beyond human hearing, but they did not rise in alertness or turn with direction. She was in the grip of something ancient and unrelenting, and she was meeting it without the strength to resist or assist. The waterhole nearby had shrunk to little more than a muddy depression. Whatever comfort it once offered had dried with the heat. The cracked mud caked against her limbs suggested she'd collapsed here hours ago, possibly in the dark, possibly after wandering alone in search of solitude, as many cows do when labor draws near. But whether by choice or by failure, she had not moved since. The absence of prints around her reinforced the silence of the place. No herd had lingered here. No young had circled back, no trumpeting calls answered from the distance. She was alone. A matriarch known to Kamau and the team, a survivor of droughts and dry seasons, now brought low not by injury or predators, but by the quiet breakdown of muscle and time. And now, within her, a calf that still moved. Kamau's gaze flicked to her side. A stronger tremor this time. He could see it clearly now, the way the skin tightened in pulses, the way the entire lower belly contorted in effort, trying to deliver life that was ready but impeded. A small protrusion pushed faintly outward near the base of her tail, the first sign of a foot, still encased in translucent membrane, peeking out only to retreat again under the lack of pressure behind it. The calf was alive. It was trying. But the mother was not pushing, not yet, not enough. Ngala leaned back slightly, his voice barely above a whisper, but heavy with implication. She's close, but not moving. No further statement was needed. Kamau nodded once and stood, brushing the dust from his palms. He looked down at the wet patch beneath her. It was growing, though not quickly. That slow trickle marked the passage of time, and with it, the narrowing of options. In a typical elephant birth, the cow will rise, brace her feet, and use the weight of her frame to assist the birth canal, allowing gravity to help the calf rotate and descend. The sac will rupture in motion, followed by hooves, then trunk, then the slippery weight of new life crashing into the world. But here, with the mother grounded and her legs bound in fatigue and clay, gravity was failing her. The calf, despite the instincts pushing it outward, had no help. Its head might remain lodged, its chest compressed. If born now, in full, it would arrive into a grave. Kamau's chest tightened. This wasn't theoretical. He had seen this before. A stillbirth from suffocation, the calf's lungs unable to draw first air as the mother's ribcage pressed against it without meaning to. Worse still, if her uterus continued contracting without a successful delivery, it could invert, an internal rupture that often ended in death. The rangers nearby moved with quiet purpose. One recorded contraction intervals, now approximately 6 minutes apart but still weak in amplitude. Another began preparing saline in case IV hydration became necessary, though administering fluids in a conscious adult elephant required sedation and precision. Sedation came with risks. In this heat, with this level of exhaustion, it could tip her into full collapse. Kamau ruled it out for now. They would wait, watch, encourage, hope. He returned to her front, kneeling again near her head, letting her see his silhouette without looming. Her eye opened once, clouded but aware, and drifted in his direction. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was constant. A gust of wind passed across the plain, lifting dust from the dry ground. In the trees beyond, birds fell silent again. Ngala's fingers tapped once against his thigh. A signal, another protrusion. This time, a second foot. Both forelegs were emerging, albeit slowly. But with no push, no descent, they could remain lodged, twisted. Kamau reached for the radio, lifting it slowly to his mouth and relaying a brief update. Bilateral hooves visible, no crowning. Mother is still grounded. The response crackled through a moment later. Monitor. Prepare for assistance. Do not extract manually. Standard protocol. Pulling a calf manually risks nerve damage, torn uterine walls, or worse, panic in the mother. Even at this point, nature had to lead. They were support, not surgeons. Another minute passed, then another. The membrane around the hooves began to rupture on its own, fluid spilling more freely into the trench. The mother's tail lifted once again, trembling, then fell. Her hind leg twitched. Kamau leaned forward slightly. Was it voluntary, or just muscle fatigue? Then came a sound, a low, broken moan, pulled deep from her chest, not loud, not panicked, just effort. She tried to shift her weight, pushing once against the earth with her right foot, then fell still again. Ngala stepped back instinctively, allowing space. The attempt was brief, but it was more than before. Kamau stood slowly, letting the moment settle. He turned toward the others. She's trying, one of the rangers exhaled softly. They knew what that meant. They might have only minutes now. If she could rise, the calf had a chance. If not, the team would be forced to intervene. And with that, everything could go wrong. Still, they waited. Another tremor passed through her belly, stronger. The hooves extended further, now halfway exposed, glistening in the heat. A trickle of blood now mingled with the fluid, a dangerous sign. If internal tearing had begun, the countdown shortened again. Kamau felt the pressure build, not as panic, but as weight. Every man here understood what was at stake, the life of a calf not yet breathing, the survival of a matriarch that carried decades of memory in her body. And still, she didn't rise. Kamau moved once more to her side, crouching, eyes level with hers. He whispered again, just loud enough to carry across the space between them. "You're almost there." Her eye flickered. Her ear moved. Another contraction began, sharper, tighter. Her body curled slightly inward, muscles gathering, pushing, not fully, not yet enough, but closer. Her chest heaved, her hind legs shifted, then stillness again. The moment passed. The calf did not emerge. The sun moved higher above the plains. The wind returned, carrying the scent of blood and fluid farther than before. In the distance, vultures began circling, still high, not yet descending. Kamau took a deep breath. The next decision would not wait much longer. She was close, but close in this world was never safe. It was simply another word for vulnerable. The sun had climbed to its mid-morning height, washing the landscape in a dry, unflinching light that pressed down on skin, hide, and breath alike. The air was still, heavy, clinging to every surface and leaving behind the distinct, suffocating weight of rising heat. There was no breeze to ease it, no clouds to scatter it, just the vast, unforgiving sky above Tsavo, pulling moisture from the land with slow, silent precision. Beneath that sky, the elephant remained where she had collapsed, body partially buried in cracked clay, half immersed in the softened trench the team had cleared in the earliest hours of the day. Around her, the ground had begun to radiate warmth from below as well, turning even the patch of thin shade near her shoulder into something brittle and warm, no longer protective. Her skin, once thickly coated in the coolness of early mud, now seemed parched and dry at its edges, dulled by dust, her breathing more shallow than it had been an hour earlier. There was no doubt now. The fatigue that had slowed her labor was beginning to shift into something more dangerous. Kamau watched her chest rise in uneven rhythm, the pattern stiff, strained, not quite labored yet, but losing endurance. His eyes tracked the pulse in her side, the tiny quiver beneath her ribs, the tension that didn't resolve. He knew what it meant. The slow progression of heat exhaustion had become an immediate threat, and with it came dehydration, not the sort that waits hours to show its effects, but the quiet, creeping kind that shuts down organs, clouds the brain, and steals the body's ability to fight just when it needs it most. He signaled with a single nod to the ranger stationed at the truck. Nothing needed to be said. They'd prepared for this. Moments later, the ranger returned carrying 2 canvas cloths, soaked heavily in cold water drawn from the insulated tank they had filled before the morning patrol. The weight of the clothes alone was enough to slow the ranger's steps. He moved without hurry, without sound. Every step was measured. The entire team knew that calm was still their greatest tool, even now, especially now. Panic had no place here. Urgency, yes, but never speed. Each person who approached the elephant did so with their presence fully under control. No raised arms, no rapid footfalls, no barking instructions. They had learned over the years that even the subtlest tension from a human could be sensed and mirrored by an animal fighting for its life. The clothes were unfolded and placed slowly across her back, draped from the spine to her flanks, so that the cool weight fell evenly, gently, across the widest part of her body. They didn't press them in, just laid them there, letting gravity and saturation do the rest. The moisture seeped slowly into the heat-strained hide, darkening the rough skin, drawing the warmth upward and outward as it evaporated. A faint hiss of steam lifted from the hottest points, and for a moment, the air shimmered where the water met sunburnt skin. Her body did not respond. She didn't flinch. There was no twitch or turn of the head. But her ears stirred, one fluttering just slightly at the edge, the cartilage flicking forward before settling again. A small thing. Almost nothing. But not nothing. At her forelimb, another ranger had knelt, using a shallow tin bowl to carve through the dirt. With gentle, repeated scoops, he widened the trench they'd started earlier, guiding more water from a separate canister into the hollow beneath her belly and back legs. They weren't trying to flood the area, just enough to keep the base of her body cooled, to prevent the core temperature from rising further. The soil darkened where water reached it, a growing patch of damp earth beneath the weight of her frame. It would buy her time, not much, but time nonetheless. Gala, crouched at her rear, moved quietly into a better line of sight. He observed the calf's progress. The hooves had extended fractionally, still visible, still glistening with fluid, but unmoving. There was no additional push, no shift in position. The mother hadn't rolled, her legs had not braced, her tail lay slack. The sac had ruptured completely, its fluid now mixed with blood, dust, and soil at the base of her spine. The calf remained lodged in the birth canal, neither emerging nor retreating, suspended in the balance of a labor that continued without power behind it. Kamau turned slightly and glanced toward the youngest of the rangers, the one with the softest voice. With the smallest gesture, a raised brow, a half nod, he passed the moment to him. The ranger stepped forward with calm, kneeling near the mother's front leg, placing one hand lightly in the dirt to ground himself. His voice came low, barely more than breath. "You're okay, girl," he whispered. "You're doing fine." He didn't repeat it, didn't draw out the words or force them. They were not meant as comfort in the way humans give comfort, but as presence, as familiar rhythm, as something alive in the stillness that surrounded her. The mother's eye, half closed for hours, flickered open slightly. She didn't look at him directly, but she didn't close her eye either. That was enough. Her breathing changed again, not with strength, not with a surge of vitality, but with depth. The exhale lengthened. Then, after a pause, a new inhale came, not deeper, but steadier. A breath drawn fully through her mouth. It was not recovery. No one allowed themselves to believe that. But it was change, and change, however small, still mattered. Kamau took the tin bowl and poured another slow stream of water down the newly carved trench, letting it run beneath her belly toward the puddled earth. The canvas cloths would need re-soaking soon. The heat was stealing their moisture quickly. But for now, the setup was working. Her temperature was no longer climbing, at least, not yet. The men didn't move far from their positions. They kept their distance, but not their focus. No one took their eyes off her, not for long, because the risks hadn't shifted. They had multiplied. If she did not rise soon, the calf could still suffocate in place, and if she remained grounded much longer, her organs could begin to shut down. Colostrum wouldn't flow, the calf wouldn't be able to nurse. Even with a live birth, a non-responsive mother meant a second wave of crisis. And yet, there it was, a twitch in her shoulder, not large, not sustained, but different than before. A tightening of muscle, a gentle inward pull at the base of her neck. Then, a pause. Then again, this time at her folded rear leg. A flicker of movement as if her body was beginning to consider itself again, checking for sensation, trying to recall what it had once known how to do. The ranger at her side whispered again, though the words were lost beneath the sound of wind returning to the basin. The dust lifted from the edge of the trench, spiraling briefly around their boots, then scattered toward the slope. Kamau remained standing, not stepping forward, not retreating. He watched, measuring her every motion. What she needed now could not be given. It had to be summoned, from within, from whatever reserves her body had left. He knew the science, but he also knew what instinct looked like when it began to return. And he saw it now, not in her eyes or trunk, but in the way her ribs no longer sank as deeply between breaths in the small shifts of muscle near her spine. In the way her tail lifted half an inch before settling again. The trench was working. The clothes were working. And perhaps most important of all, the waiting, the still, deliberate patience of those who knew not to intervene too soon, was working. The labor was not progressing visibly. But something had changed. The calf remained unseen except for the partial glimpse of glistening hooves. But the mother was beginning to test her limits again, not from will, not from choice. But because the body, cooled just enough, had started to remember how to rise. And for the first time in over an hour, the possibility of her standing did not feel remote. It felt distant, yes, but reachable. The cloths would need to be replaced soon. More water would be needed. The wind would continue to pull moisture from the air, from her skin, from every exposed inch of earth. But for now, there was a margin, a narrow one, enough to continue, enough to wait, enough to believe that the next motion might lead to another, and that another might carry her to her feet. She was not saved, not yet, but she was no longer slipping, and for now, for this moment, that was all they could ask. There was no fanfare, no triumphant roar to signal the arrival, only a low, chest-deep groan that stretched through the hot silence of the basin, raw and quiet and full of everything she had left to give. Her flank tightened once, a final involuntary contraction that rippled down her spine like the edge of a storm rolling over dry land. The trench beneath her rear limbs, damp from hours of effort and water, caught the weight of the calf as it slipped free of her body, emerging into the heat-drenched dust in a slow, trembling slide. It didn't land with force. It fell gently, awkwardly, its limbs folding beneath it in an unnatural curl. Its flank pressed against the cooled earth and the soaked clothes that had long since lost their chill. The calf's body was still slick, coated in a film of birth fluid that clung to its skin in streaks and patches, already drying under the sun. For a long moment, no one moved. The rangers remained in position, scattered along the edge of the clearing, watching with hands still, eyes trained not just on the newborn, but on the mother, her side rising in shallow, irregular intervals, her head low and unmoving, her great ears spread out like fallen sails. Kamau was kneeling 10 meters off, partially obscured by dry grass, his hands resting on his thighs, his weight balanced forward, as though leaning into the silence would somehow offer support. But he did not speak. No one did. Around them, the reserve held its breath. The calf remained motionless, save for the occasional tremble in its limbs, tiny pulses that didn't yet qualify as motion, more like the body's recognition of gravity for the first time. Its legs were crumpled beneath it, knees bent awkwardly inward, hooves twisted at angles that seemed unnatural, but were, for this moment, entirely expected. Birth, for elephants, is rarely graceful. The pressure of the passage, the rotation of limbs within the narrow confines of the pelvic channel, often forces the newborn into a temporary collapse. But what mattered now was breath. Kamau watched closely for the rise of the ribs, the subtle lift of the shoulder, the stretch of the spine, and after several seconds that felt like a closing door, he saw it. The calf's chest moved, a small gasp, almost imperceptible, then another, stronger, followed by a shudder that passed from head to tail. It wasn't enough to mark life as safe, but it was life. The trunk, still curled from the familiar shape it held in the womb, unfurled halfway, lifted weakly, and fell back against the calf's chest. Its ear, flattened beneath the weight of its head, fluttered once, then stilled. The eyes remained shut. Kamau exhaled through his nose. Not relief. Not yet. But breath had begun, and for now, that was all they could ask. Still, the other half of the risk remained. The mother had not moved since that final effort. Her body lay sprawled across the ground, her side barely rising, her limbs slack. Her trunk was stretched along the dust, unmoving, her tusk half buried in loose clay. She had not looked toward the calf, had not shifted, even by instinct, to clear space between them. Kamau's gaze flicked toward the newborn's position. Too close. Far too close. The calf had landed in a narrow wedge beside her ribcage. If she rolled now, even accidentally, her weight could crush the fragile bones that had only just formed. And yet, she had to rise. Without standing, she could not nurse. Without nursing, the calf wouldn't receive colostrum, the first milk, packed with antibodies vital to its survival. The clock had not stopped. It had reset, and the margin of safety was no wider than it had been hours earlier. The other rangers remained where they were, watching for signs of movement, of collapse, of panic. None came. But then the calf shifted. Not much, only the rear leg, but it extended outward, stiffened, and scraped the soil. The motion sent a spray of dust across its side. Its head, which had been resting at an odd tilt, twitched slightly. Then again. Slowly its spine arched, not lifting, but adjusting, pressing into the earth as if to confirm the boundaries of its new world. It didn't lift its head, didn't cry, but it moved again. This time, the leg pulled back in, then kicked once, awkward and aimless, a reflex without control. Its trunk twitched once more, lifting in a wobbly line that bent halfway, then collapsed against its own shoulder. And then came the sound. It was high-pitched, thin, and unformed, a cry, but barely. The sound of lungs that didn't yet know how to coordinate breath with voice. It cut across the heat like a thread of wind through still water, delicate and unsure. But it was there. Kamau flinched, not out of fear, but attention. His eyes locked on the calf, and for a moment, even the birds fell silent again. The mother's body stirred, a subtle flicker in her tail, then her ear twitched, her trunk curled slightly at the tip, her eye opened, not wide, but enough. Enough to let light in. Enough to change everything. She didn't rise, not yet, but her head shifted, chin dragging against the soil as she turned slightly toward the sound. The calf made the noise again, this time stronger, though still trembling. The mother's trunk moved again, tracing the air in a half circle, then falling still. It was the beginning of connection, the ancient tether between cow and calf, even when the body could not yet respond. Kamau saw it, felt it, and knew something had changed. He stood slowly, not approaching yet, but ready. He glanced at the others, who mirrored his posture, staying low but alert. The calf, encouraged by some unconscious recognition, moved again. Its front leg jerked, then found the ground. It tried to lift its head, failed, and tried again. The second time, it succeeded, barely. Its neck extended, trembling under its own weight, and its chin rose just high enough for its eye to blink into the sun. The expression was not comprehension, it was instinct, light, movement, survival. The calf's body swayed, unsure, still half-curled but increasingly alive. It drew in another breath and cried once more, louder now, nasal and raw, an unformed note of need. It was the sound that brought the mother fully to awareness. Her eye opened fully. Her trunk rose, reached slightly toward the calf, then dropped. Kamau watched, calculating the next steps. If she didn't stand soon, he would have to decide whether to intervene, to reposition the calf manually, to risk a response that could shatter the fragile line between them. But then the mother moved again. Her rear leg bent, shifting beneath her. Her shoulder lifted slightly, then collapsed. A start. No more. But the intention was there. The will. Returning. He took one step forward, then stopped. The calf let out another cry, this time a rhythmic higher sound that echoed off the basin walls. It was not strong, but it was persistent. The mother's breathing deepened. No longer the shallow tremor of heat stroke. Her flank expanded. She blinked slowly. Her ears twitched. She was watching now. The air around them had changed. The silence was no longer heavy. It was poised. The wind, which had gone still earlier, returned with a hush, brushing along the grass with gentle insistence. Dust rose in fine spirals, catching the edges of the light. The cloth draped across the mother's back had begun to dry at the edges, stiffening where water had once clung. Kamau stepped back again. This moment belonged to them now, cow and calf. A link just beginning to form, tested by heat, exhaustion, and time, but forming nonetheless. The calf cried again, and this time, the mother answered. Not with a trumpet, not with strength, but with a sound barely audible. A low, broken exhale. Not breathless, not gone, but beginning again. And so the day held its place, suspended in the tension between what had nearly been lost and what now, slowly, refused to be. The sun did not relent, the risks did not vanish. The margin for survival remained thin, but the calf was breathing, the mother was listening. And somewhere, beyond the heat and dust, something ancient continued, quiet, trembling, alive. The wind had quieted again, settling the air into a breathless stillness that felt more like suspension than calm. Around the edges of the basin, the rangers stood where they had been for over an hour, silent, unmoving, watching over a moment none of them could yet call turning point or ending. The elephant remained grounded, her flank now darkened with evaporating water, her limbs folded in on themselves as though carved into the earth. The calf remained partially delivered, motionless but alive, hooves exposed, glistening in the heat-softened dust. The light had shifted subtly, not yet afternoon, but slanting lower than it had been, and with that tilt came shadow, gentle and long, reaching toward her as though the day itself was leaning in. Kamau moved, not suddenly, but with the same weight of care that had marked every hour before. A new cloth, soaked again in cool water mixed lightly with salt to replace the minerals her skin had begun to lose, draped heavily in his hands. He crossed the distance between them alone this time, the others watching, not interfering. The water in the trench had begun to recede, absorbed into soil and body alike, and the canvas sheet draped earlier now clung faintly to her back, its dampness faded. The risk remained unchanged. She had not yet risen. The calf had not yet cleared the canal, and without motion either could be lost. But something in her had begun to shift, and Kamau trusted that change enough to come closer. He stopped at her shoulder, just far enough not to crowd her, and crouched. He held the cloth gently in both hands and let the scent of water reach her before the touch did. Her skin twitched beneath the damp air, and then, for the first time, her head lifted. Not fully, only a few inches, but enough for the line of her neck to arc slightly forward, enough to break the stillness that had held her face pressed to the earth since before sunrise. Kamau did not speak. The cloth remained in his hands, motionless. Her eyes, dimmed by heat and exhaustion, opened fully. Her ears shifted back and forth, and then, without sound, without warning, her trunk uncurled. It moved slowly, carefully, tracing an invisible path through the air, not upward, not outward, toward him. Her trunk did not waver or pull away. It extended with purpose, a line of heavy, dust-marked muscle coming to rest lightly against the center of Kamau's chest. It was not forceful. It did not seek anything. It simply rested there, the tip folding briefly over itself in a soft curl, then opening again, touching fabric, skin, breath. Kamau remained still. His eyes didn't shift. His hands didn't rise. The moment didn't demand response, only witness. To the others it was hard to say how long it lasted, a few seconds, a full minute. But in that quiet exchange, something changed. The tension in her shoulders softened. Her trunk lingered, then withdrew. Her head stayed lifted. She inhaled slow and deep, and her front leg shifted, pulling beneath her with effort that had not surfaced in hours. The cloth, still soaked, was placed across her flank again. Kamau backed away as she blinked and looked forward, no longer inward. And for the first time, the question of whether she would rise no longer felt like a doubt, but a matter of when. Beyond the basin, the wind returned in a hush, sliding through the grass in long, low strokes. A small bird lifted from the acacia's shadow. The horizon held, and the dust no longer settled. It moved. The light had softened slightly, its harshness mellowed by the angle of the descending sun, but the heat still clung to the earth with quiet persistence. Dust hung motionless in the air above the calf, suspended by the absence of wind, as though the world itself had paused to wait. The newborn had managed to lift its head again, shakily, the tip of its trunk twitching with each breath, its legs folded and unfolded, testing angles and weight without direction, a series of instinctive gestures rooted in something older than memory. Beside it, the mother had not moved for several long minutes. Her eyes remained open now, but her gaze drifted, uncertain, distant, somewhere between recognition and restraint. The effort required to stand still loomed beyond her reach, her body drained from the long labor and the hours of heat pressed against her skin. Kamau stood quietly at a distance, the wind finally brushing his face again, the scent of dust and blood lifting slightly from the basin floor. And then came the sound, not loud, not urgent, but unmistakable. A low, rolling rumble that traveled across the land in a vibration more felt than heard. It came from beyond the ridge, southwest, where the land dipped briefly before rising again into open thornveld. The sound moved through the ground like a current, subtle but unignorable. The calf twitched in response, startled by the sensation, its head jerking upward before collapsing gently into the hollow of its own shoulder. Kamau turned his head slowly toward the horizon. A thin line of dust was beginning to rise in the distance, Not wind, not birds, movement, heavy, deliberate, the kind that carried weight and memory. Another rumble followed, this one deeper, layered with the complex vocal signature only elephants knew how to share. It wasn't a call for help or warning. It was location, presence. A matriarch's voice sent into the air like a hand reaching forward. Kamau's breath caught for just a moment. She had been found. Whether by scent, sound, or something unseen, her family had heard her, or perhaps had simply returned along the same migratory loop, not knowing what they would find. The dust rose higher. And now, faintly, shadows began to form along the edge of the sky, a cluster of shapes drawing nearer in silence. The mother stirred. Slowly, her trunk lifted from the soil. It did not reach, but hovered briefly before lowering again, her breath drawn through flared nostrils that twitched faintly as the scent reached her. A pause. And then her front leg moved, not far, but a press into the ground, a test of her own weight. The muscles along her shoulder flinched and held. She shifted again, pushing from her hip with the kind of strength that came not from recovery, but from memory. She had done this before. She knew how. And though her body resisted, her instincts no longer did. Her calf, sensing the motion, made another attempt to rise, legs folding beneath its belly, hooves skidding, head lifted in a tremble that sent a line of fluid down its cheek. The mother groaned, a low breath broken by effort. She pushed, her knees folded forward, back legs trembling, then tucking beneath her massive body in a slow, shaking arc. One shoulder rose, then the other. And with a lurch that sent the cloth on her back sliding to the ground, she stood, unsteady, swaying, but upright. Dust spilled off her skin as she adjusted her feet, trunk swaying gently to balance her weight. Her ears lifted slightly. She blinked and then turned her head toward the ridge. Her family was coming. The calf leaned forward again, this time with more control, back legs bent, front hooves planted into the soft trench. It rose halfway, then slipped, then tried again. Its mother stepped closer, positioning herself just behind it, her trunk curling toward its back but never touching. The rumble came again, closer now, deeper. A reply followed, this time from her chest, not loud, not full, but hers. The sun, bending lower, caught the edges of the distant dust line, casting long shadows across the basin as the herd crested the rise and began their descent toward them. The grass, flattened by heat, lifted slightly in the breeze. Kamau took one step back, then another, as the basin prepared to receive its own. And across the air, where silence had lived for most of the day, the sound of home began to return. The dust had barely settled when the first shapes broke through the ridge, broad forms moving in slow, synchronized rhythm, their outlines soft against the descending light. One by one, they emerged in silence, each step measured, each movement deliberate. The herd was smaller than Kamau remembered, perhaps 7, maybe 9, but what mattered was not the number, it was the weight of their presence. They didn't rush. They never did. Instead, they descended like memory itself, quiet and undeniable, drawn by something older than instinct, older than sound. The matriarch in front paused midway down the slope, her ears spreading wide before folding in a slow wave, and then she continued forward, her pace adjusting as her gaze locked on the mother below. Behind her came a younger female, 2 juveniles, and a calf only slightly older than the newborn, now lying at its mother's feet. There was no sound exchanged, no trumpet, no call, just the rhythm of approach, and the shared understanding of what they had returned to. The mother watched them come, her body still trembling slightly from the effort of standing, her knees not yet fully locked beneath her. Her calf leaned into her leg now, trunk swaying uncertainly, front legs buckling with each shift of weight. She remained still, eyes wide and fixed not on her kin, but on something else. Kamau. He hadn't moved since the first rumble echoed across the ridge, still half hidden beneath the fading shade of a low brush tree. His arms hung at his sides, his hands open, empty, patient. He made no sound. He simply waited, watching the herd, watching her. And then, something shifted. The mother turned her head slowly toward him, the movement unhurried but precise. She held the gaze. Her ears relaxed, her tail lowered, and then, with visible effort, she took a step, not toward the others, but aside. It was only one movement, but it created a clear line between where she stood and where her calf now swayed on uncertain legs. That narrow gap, cleared without force, was not a chance. She stepped back again, just slightly, positioning herself so that the path from Kamau to the calf was unobstructed. The herd halted at a distance, watching without tension, their trunks hanging low, ears still. And then, with the same slow precision, the mother turned her head once more and bowed. It was not a deep movement, not exaggerated, but it was unmistakable. Her head dipped forward and held, her trunk curved downward, her eyes closed for a moment longer than a blink. It was not a submission, it was not fear, it was something else, something no one had seen before. Kamau did not approach, not immediately. His breath caught, not out of surprise, but because something in the air had changed, something fragile that did not belong to science or training. And when he did finally step forward, it was without urgency. The dust shifted beneath his boots, rising in low clouds as he crossed the narrow strip of soil between them. The mother did not move. She kept her head low, breathing evenly, the tip of her trunk resting in the dirt. Her calf turned slightly toward the movement, blinking in Kamau's direction, trunk lifting instinctively before falling against its own leg. Kamau reached the edge of the trench and stopped, crouching slowly until he was eye level with the calf. He made no sound, extended no hand. He simply met its gaze and let the moment remain. Behind him, the herd stood still, and above them, the wind moved again, brushing softly through the grass, bending the acacia branches in a rhythm that belonged to no one. The sun sank lower still, casting long shadows across the basin, and in the silence that followed, nothing else was needed. Picture prompt. An African savanna at golden hour, warm sunlight bathing the dust-filled air. A weakened but standing female elephant stands protectively beside her newborn calf, both lightly coated in dried mud. Surrounding them is a semicircle of elephants from her herd, massive yet gentle, creating a silent wall of safety. In the foreground, a ranger in khaki, Kamau, stands still a few feet away. One of the elephants has stepped aside, creating a clear path between the herd and Kamau. The mother elephant faces him directly, her trunk lowered in a symbolic bow. Her eye meets his, calm, knowing. Behind them, the acacia trees stretch into the horizon. The sky is soft pink and amber. Dust particles drift in the fading light. The atmosphere is reverent, quiet, and sacred, like witnessing the end of a long trial and the beginning of something new.